So, before I start going deep into this video, I thought I'd give a little bit of an intro, considering I have been gone for over a year on this platform. And as you may have noticed, last video, first video on the channel to really blow up, and after that video, blew up, I kind of didn't really know what to do. Um, it was like I posted that video at the end of high school, and college was starting up for me immediately after that. So I really didn't know whether I should continue it or not. Maybe I should wait until I'm settled in. And then academics kind of took control of my life, and a bunch of stuff ended up getting in the way, health issues, things like that. So I'm back, I hope to be making videos more soon, depending on how things go. Might not be for a month or two, maybe a couple months, but I hope to be making videos again. Just because this took me days to work on, just the script alone. So I hope to have it out today. But I mean, today isn't by the time I'm recording this, but I don't really know. And this whole section, I'm gonna leave this uncut because I'm not reading off of anything, but it has been hard for me to make videos and things like that. I know that the last video, I didn't really put that much effort into it, which is why I was kind of upset that it blew up as much as it did, but I kind of understand it now. I don't really care for Splatoon much anymore. A lot has happened to make that the case. So I'm moving on to other things. If you subscribed specifically for that, you're free to leave. If you would like, I might come back to it, but the only reason I'd come back is if Splatoon 4 got announced, frankly. So, onto the actual video, that this is what you guys are here for. No reason to keep any of you waiting any longer. Pokémon is the most successful media franchise in the world, one which is packed full of games, nearly thousands of plushies, the most successful trading card game in history, and a die-hard community of artists, players, collectors, and the like. But with the sheer success of a franchise like this, pressure is put on those who develop the core part that makes the whole thing run: games. Few things are 100% true all the time. Somewhere in the world, grass is green, the sky is blue, and the development of a new Pokémon game is being rushed to hell. Often a new generation of Pokémon is released every 2 years, a pattern that's been going strong since the release of Ruby and Sapphire in Japan in 2002. Since the switch to 3D, with the release of Pokémon X and Y, fans have noticed a pretty stark dip in quality in the mainline games. The reason for this is not the point of this video, and hundreds of people have already covered it before me, so there's not really a point in doing it anymore. It's been done to death, give it a rest. This begins a cycle among Pokémon fans. Every 2 years or so, a new Pokémon game is released, and thus everyone moves to the next one. The next one has a notable dip in some form of quality that makes everyone malign it on release, leaving a small group of less vocal people who love the game. Then, as time goes on, more people start to mellow out and move on to the next game in the franchise, where that maligning continues, leaving only the die-hard fans of the previous games behind. As the honeymoon of the phase of the new game dies down, people start to see its flaws, leading to what I call the "actually, this game always sucked" phenomenon. This leads die-hard fans of the last game to see those posts and say, "Hey, my game did this way better." This then leads to another phenomenon, one I like to call "I always liked this game, and here's why." Pokémon fans, being annoying as they are, see this and remember their experience disliking said previous game, which leads to yet another phenomenon I like to call "Where did you come from? No one liked this game. You're stupid and I'm smart." I've been a Pokémon fan since I was 7 years old, and I've seen this cycle not nearly as genuinely insufferable as it was when Pokémon Sword and Pokémon Shield released on November 15th, 2019. As the first mainline Pokémon games on the already 2-year-old Nintendo Switch, Sword and Shield were the first mainline games to be playable on a home console, and most importantly on a TV. This gave fans the opportunity to see a Pokémon game in a resolution they've never seen before, entirely HD, and with none of the visual clutter that comes with games on, say, the 3DS. This also gave fans the opportunity to see all of the visual flaws the game flaunted on full display, in high definition, not hidden by any filters on the console it was made for. I remember when Sword and Shield were announced. For me, I was excited from the very beginning. Up until this point, Pokemon's only game on the Switch was Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, games which I enjoyed, but most people didn't. When the trailer came out, I thought the legendary Pokemon looked awesome, and a first look at a region based around the UK made me very excited. Most people, though, didn't have the same reaction I did. Judging from most of the YouTube comments on early trailers, people were pretty excited for the games, something I wholly didn't expect when doing my research for this video. But upon looking at more comments from trailers as time went on, people started to really dislike these games before they even came out. The reveal of the game had a lot of mixed reception. People didn't really like the starters, they didn't like how the game looked, they thought the trees were ugly. I could make an entire video solely on this tree and the backlash it caused. But the biggest complaint when the game was announced was the lack of a true national dex. Up to this game, the national dex was a staple part of the post-game of most Pokemon games. It was how you obtained the shiny charm, among other things, and incentivized playing older games so you can complete the Pokédex in the new ones. Upon the release of Sword and Shield, the total number of Pokemon in the National Pokédex had reached a staggering 890 Pokemon. This means that for Sword and Shield to be made, 890 Pokemon would have to be modeled from scratch, even though most of them wouldn't be obtainable in the wild. This was a ridiculous task even for the older games, and its absence really didn't hurt Sword and Shield as a game. But Pokemon fans did what Pokemon fans tend to do, and complained about it heavily. Dexit was a massive controversy in the Pokemon community in 2019, as many people saw the lack of inclusion of these Pokemon as lazy, and especially so thanks to a misconstrued interview with Junichi Masuda for the USG magazine. Masuda is quoted as saying, "We already have well over 800 Pokemon species, and there's going to be more added in these games. And now that they're on the Nintendo Switch, we're creating it with a much higher fidelity with higher quality animations." This was taken to mean that Sword and Shield were trading some Pokemon in exchange for graphical fidelity, a claim which is ostensibly not true. In another article, this time from Shigeru Omori for the Famitsu magazine, this time Masuda and I had a lot of discussions. It had already been very difficult to bring all of the Pokemon to Pokemon Sun and Moon, but this time the hardware was the Switch, and we had to remake all of the models from scratch. So we had to make some choices. But if you play Pokemon Sword and Shield, I think you'll find that even if there is a restriction to the number of Pokemon we can bring over, things like the wild areas and the story will have a very large volume. And as the IGN article Pokemon Sword and Shield Controversy and Dexit Explained continues, the National Dex issue and Game Freak's subsequent comments regarding it opened Sword and Shield up to wider criticism. Mind you, all of this was before the games even released. This was just announcements coming before the game. For many Pokemon fans, Sword and Shield were never given a fair shot. The outrage and criticism tossed towards the game prior to its release were enough for a lot of people to write it off as a complete failure before it even launched, which caused many people to not even pick the game up when it released. From this, you may already begin to understand the state of discourse around this game. The stigma around Sword and Shield only exacerbated itself upon the release of the game proper. I think it's important for me, from this video on, to split this video into parts, based on what I think are the specifics of what we're talking about. When I was first writing this script, after this part, I went on a huge tangent about very non-specific parts of the game, which ended up getting really confusing. I want this video to actually be watchable, so I'm gonna split it up. Pokemon games follow a very simple gameplay loop. Regions are split into routes, all of which have different Pokemon which spawn in them, new trainers to battle, and often lead to towns or cities. The Galar region is unique, as it's the only Pokemon game where the town and city distinction doesn't matter at all. Every city past the first two has a stadium in it, which replaces the typical gym where the major gym battles take place. Galar is also unique for its wild area, which is a massive area of land in between Wedgehurst and Motostoke which extends up to Hammerlock, in an area which is accessible from the start, but extremely difficult to traverse certain levels due to the higher level Pokemon. The main issue people have with the gameplay of Sword and Shield is one that I'll concede is an issue I have as well. The difficulty in this game is non-existent, to say the least. Often you can very easily sweep gym battles using an overleveled Pokemon and not even need to Dynamax, but if you're like me and prefer to use level caps or just play through the game without grinding, you'll find a couple tricky fights here and there, and that can spice up the pretty normal gameplay loop that Sword and Shield offers. Sword and Shield are the first games to offer a limited Pokédex from the start, but I think the selection of the Pokemon in the region, in combination with all the new options, makes for a very strong and tight Pokédex which makes challenge playthroughs especially fun. Another core component of this game is its gimmicks, something we'll cover later as it pertains to designs, but since it's something that also collides with the gameplay, it's something I gotta cover here. The Galar region introduces two new gimmicks to the core of its gameplay. Those are the Dynamax phenomenon and regional evolutions. We'll cover regional evolutions first, since there's less to talk about. Sword and Shield adds 13 regional forms, while the DLCs added a further 6, bringing the total to 19. Among the Pokémon with regional forms were Farfetch'd, Linoone, Yamask, Mr. Mime, and Meowth, all of whom got new evolutions to go along with their regional form. Instead of evolving into Cofagrigus or Persian, Yamask evolves into Runerigus, while Meowth evolves into Berserker. The other four got unique evolutions that their line didn't have before. These new evolutions allow for stronger base stats as well as different typings, movesets, and inspirations for the regional form's designs, without impeding on the original thought behind them. In Alola, most regional forms still had to be in line with the original Pokemon's design and inspiration, but shifted to fit the new Alolan theme. For example, take a look at Alolan Meowth and Persian. They're still overly snobby cats with a royalty theme, but the Alolan forms crank that up to 11, and have them be more spoiled brats with darker intentions and malicious personalities. Not too different, but similar enough to be recognizable while doing a fun twist on the original. Now let's take a look at Galarian Meowth. Instead of being a snobby cat with a love for money, Galarian Meowth is a feral, bearded steel type that evolves into Berserker, a Viking cat with razor claws and an entirely different body plan to Persian. These new evolutions open the floor to doing entirely different things with an evolution line, while still keeping the iconic look of the Pokemon they were based on intact. The other gimmick Sword and Shield added was the Dynamax phenomenon. This is a major part of the story, and will spoil a good chunk of it. I know the game is quite old at this point, but some people still don't like spoilers, so this is your official warning from here on out that spoilers will be discussed. The Dynamax phenomenon is the ability for Pokemon in certain areas of the Galar region to grow a ginormous size, and to use moves which are incredibly powerful and cause a variety of effects, all while gaining a much larger HP pool as well. On its own, it's an interesting gimmick, similar to Mega Evolution, where it grants one of your Pokemon a sizable buff during battle. Only the difference is, this one doesn't last the whole battle, and doesn't change the appearance of the Pokemon in battle. Or does it? Dynamax was introduced alongside its cousin, Gigantamax. Gigantamax is even more similar to Mega Evolution, granting a certain Pokemon species a brand new form which is only usable while Dynamaxed. Pokemon who can Gigantamax get a new design, as well as a little stamp on their summary page, and a special signature move. Unlike Mega Evolution, Gigantamax forms were given to Pokemon from the region it was introduced in, as well as fan favorites from earlier generations, and a lot of Pokemon who didn't have the luxury of receiving Mega Evolutions in Kalos or Hoenn. As of the release of the DLC, 32 Pokemon can Gigantamax, and although this is subjective, I think almost all of their designs work quite well as evolutions to the base form's designs and influences. Some work far better than others, though. Gigantamax Pokemon in the story are often used as big boss Pokemon, being the ace Pokemon for 6 of the 10 Galar gym leaders, the only exceptions being Milo and Nessa because they're the first 2 gyms, and Piers for story reasons, although Marnie, his successor, uses a Gigantamax Grimmsnarl. They also appear in Dynamax raid battles, a feature which only appears in the wild area and DLC areas. These battles give players the ability to catch their own Gigantamax Pokemon as well as strong Dynamax Pokemon, and obtain tons of items to strengthen their team. In the Isle of Armor DLC, players can use Max Mushrooms to turn their Pokemon into Gigantamax Pokemon, if their species already has it. Dynamax as a feature is one that most people can't seem to agree on. Most Pokemon fans really love Mega Evolution, but a lot of them really hate Dynamax when it's essentially, from a gameplay perspective, the same thing. Especially Gigantamax forms, which, when compared to Mega counterparts of the same Pokemon, evolve the ideas presented in the base form in a more coherent way than Mega Evolution. Gengar becoming an all-consuming shadow rather than a third-eye ghost monster, Blastoise becoming a full-armored fortress rather than just gaining a third bigger cannon, I can go on. Whichever you prefer, I think there's a strong point of nostalgia leaning in the direction of Mega Evolution that Dynamax just doesn't get the liberty of having. And that's coming from me, someone whose first game was Pokemon Y. All in all, the gameplay of Sword and Shield just seems like a natural evolution of the usual Pokemon gameplay, with the usual tropes we see in the Gym Challenge utterly perfected. There's plenty of fair criticisms regarding boring route design and the lack of much to do in the cities, all of which are fair, but those criticisms, which are far more often touted, when there's plenty positive to say about Sword and Shield and how they evolve the gameplay of Pokemon, something which is usually swept under the rug. One criticism, though, which cannot be ignored and has to be addressed, is the absolute worst thing about the game is its story. Where do I begin? Sword and Shield are my favorite Pokemon games, but on every replay I do, the part that at this point has just grown to make me sad is the story. We've seen time and time again that Pokemon games can have incredible stories with emotional endings and great character arcs. In fact, the game before this, Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, had one of the best stories in the entire franchise, and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet made me cry at the end. Sword and Shield has its fair share of good characters and fun story beats too, but they're drowned out by the game's biggest glaring problem. See, pretty early on, you meet a certain character who will become very important as the story progresses. His name is Chairman Rose, and he's not exactly an interesting figure, nor is he particularly threatening or enigmatic. It's easy to tell that he'll be some sort of antagonist just from his vaguely threatening, extremely attractive secretary that he brings with him everywhere. The problem with this is that his villainous twist drops out of completely and absolutely nowhere. We know that he has one of your rivals, Bede, collecting wishing stars around Galar for some reason, but that's pretty much the extent of it. Pokemon seem to be randomly Dynamaxing at points, but of course you never see this happen, you just hear about it. All this incredible build-up culminates in the reveal that, shocker, Chairman Rose was evil all along. What are his motivations, you ask? To stop a possible energy crisis which might happen in the next 1,000 years. And how does he plan to do this? Chairman Rose plans to send the region into another Darkest Day, which is an event that nearly destroyed the region by causing Pokemon to randomly Dynamax and go berserk. He plans to do this by feeding the legendary Pokemon Eternatus a massive sum of energy, so its power can grant Galar a near infinite supply of energy. I don't need to tell you, but this is an absurd reason to send your region into complete and total chaos. Almost no one likes this part of the story, which has been talked about to death in way better videos than mine. So, instead of focusing on the negative and beating an already dead ancient dragon god, let me talk about the positives of the story. Like I mentioned earlier, the gym challenge is incredibly fun. It feels like a high-stakes sporting event with you as the star player, and your rivals feel like real rivals. They're fellow underdogs in this big tournament, with their reasons to want to win the challenge and become champion all their own. At the start of the game, you're introduced to your main rival, Hop, and his older brother, the champion of the Galar League, Leon. Leon is built in a fantastic way, not just being an obstacle for you to beat in order to beat the game like other champions, but acting like someone the player and Hop have known for a very long time. Leon is an undoubtedly charming character, and showing him and his fanbase right at the start alongside a cutscene which outlines him and Raihan's rivalry from the very start is a great way to introduce and make your player base fall in love with the champion. As you continue, you meet and learn about your 3 rivals in the gym challenge. There's Hop. He's your best friend and your main rival, and he's the, as previously mentioned, younger brother of the region's champion. His brother Leon is completely undefeated, and as one of the strongest trainers in the world, leaves Hop with massive shoes to fill if he doesn't want to fall into his brother's shadow. Problem is, it just doesn't seem like he's cut out for battles. No matter what he does, what team he uses, he just can't seem to beat you or the other rivals. Bede is another one of the rivals you meet pretty early on. Even though he's the last one you meet, I think it's important to mention him here. Bede is a pretentious, overly competent prick with a superiority complex. He was chosen and endorsed by the chairman himself, so it makes sense that he'd be so confident in his abilities. Bede's arc is defined by a want to impress the only father figure he's ever known, one who barely even remembers his name. Bede wants to win so bad so he can prove that he's worth something. He's also another reason for Hop's inferiority complex. These 2 rivals are honestly among Pokemon's best in my opinion. They capture both the mean and nice rivals that people tend to really like in these games. They capture different aspects of the underdog story and some kind of sports-related media, which is something that Pokemon rarely covers, and I think it works super well for them in particular. Now, if you were paying attention, I mentioned that there were 3 main rivals in the game, and I've only mentioned 2. Early on, you're told to go to the Motostoke Stadium in order to sign up for the gym challenge with the league and see the opening show. You go to stay at a nearby hotel for the night, where you and Hop are caught in the middle of a big disturbance caused by a local gang that calls themselves Team Yell. After all of this goes down, you meet Marnie, the girl that all these Team Yell grunts are here to cheer on. Marnie, at first glance, is a pretty interesting character. She's the little sister of Spikeman's gym leader, Piers, and she wants to bring more attention to her town. which is going under because it's the only town without a power spot in its gym, meaning Pokemon in the gym just can't Dynamax freely. This is okay with Piers, who doesn't seem to like Dynamaxing all that much. Still, Marnie joins the gym challenge to prove to everyone that Spikemouth still has what it takes to be a competitor. I have no issue with Marnie or the story they were going for. My only issue is that they seem to completely drop the story halfway through the game for no reason, and even have the really weird decision to make Marnie Gigantamax her Grimmsnarl during the final fight of the tournament. This is, needless to say, a bizarre choice which undermines the core of Marnie's story and makes for an unsatisfying end to what would otherwise be a pretty fun and cool character with an awesome design and fun team. Something else that Pokemon games seem to be really good at is delving into the history of a region through its mythos and legendary Pokemon. Galar, I'd argue, is no different, and even really, really good at this. Galar is a region set after an apocalypse, thousands of years before the game takes place. That apocalypse, the previously mentioned Darkest Day, saw the near-complete destruction of Galar and the nearby Crown Tundra, including the defeat and destruction of Calyrex and his kingdom at the hands of Eternamax Eternatus. But out of this destruction rose a couple of heroes, wielding a sword and shield, who were said to slay the monster and restore peace to the region. Over time, the myth was passed down like a game of telephone, spread across tapestries and murals throughout the region, which depict a variety of versions of the story. One which include a singular hero wielding both the sword and shield, two young heroes who defeated Eternatus on their own, and a third, hidden version, which is revealed when Bede destroys an ancient mural in Stowonside, showing that the true heroes of the myth were two Pokemon, massive wolves that wield the sword and shield. The story this sets up is actually pretty interesting, and you get to watch as Sonia, the professor insert for this region, pieces it together as you journey through the gym challenge. This is something really cool, since you already encounter Zacian or Zamazenta at the start of their game in their Hero of Many Battles forms, right outside of your house in the Slumbering Weald. So at this point, the player puts together that those Pokemon are the heroes mentioned in the myth, and the story starts to come together and make sense. Upon playing the second DLC, you're introduced to Calyrex in the Crown Tundra, and hear his story on how he battled Eternatus on his own before Zacian and Zamazenta, before promptly being defeated. The legendary Pokemon in Sword and Shield are, honestly, in my opinion, extremely well made. They have extensive backstories that connect to each other in ways that tie them to the main story of the region, something which is honestly kind of rare in other regions. I promise I'll come back to that, but this video is running on and I don't know how much of it is nonsense at this point. I want to say, this is something that isn't in the script, but I do want to say just clarify what I meant by connect to each other. A lot of legendary Pokemon in different regions don't really have a connection to the other legendary Pokemon that exist in those regions. You have Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina that connect to each other. Regigigas sort of connects, you can stretch that, but Darkrai and Cresselia, not necessarily. A lot of Pokemon legendaries that are introduced often don't really have much to do with the overall core of the region, and mostly are just there to flesh out the world as a whole. Think like I said, Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, Rayquaza, Kyogre, and Groudon. Like, a lot of these aren't very regional, which is something that Sword and Shield does very, very well, in my opinion. The backbone to any Pokemon games are, of course, the Pokemon. Every region's Pokedex is split into the regional and national Pokedexes, but this was done away with in Sword and Shield. This change, as controversial as it was at the time, makes complete sense now, 5 years removed from the release. This is something I covered earlier on and won't spend more time on, but it really soured people's perception and was, all things considered, a pretty great regional Pokedex. As usual at this point, I'll start with my negatives. Starter Pokemon in this region are, despite being one of my favorite trios, lackluster in a lot of ways. Their concepts are not immediately obvious when you see them, something which other starter trios get very right. And also, they're monotype, which immediately makes them a little more boring than starters usually are, especially being followed up with the amazing Paldea trio 3 years later. Next, with the amount of Pokemon that got added, a lot of them ended up falling through the cracks for people. Certain Pokemon, which all things considered, should have been hits, ended up being really bad in terms of play, which led a lot of people to forgetting about them or not liking them. Examples of Pokemon like this are Nickit and Thievul, Gossifleur and Eldegoss, Ice-Q, and Stonjourner. These Pokemon do not provide a ton of value in a playthrough, so despite being cute or fun, people just didn't keep them. Other Pokemon are good but not useful, or similar to a Pokemon people like more and are therefore not one people picked up. Examples of this are Yamper and Boltund, Clobbopus and Grapploct, Frostmoth, and Cursula. Am I saying it's weird to like these Pokemon? No, of course not. Clobbopus and Nickit are some of my favorite Galar Pokemon, but it's hard to find a reason to use them past looking cute. On to the positives though, and there's a lot. This region introduces a ton of unique Pokemon, all of which have their own unique concepts and designs. There isn't a single line in this region where I don't see the influences painted clear on the face of the design, and you can tell that these were made with solid ideas in mind. Quite unlike a few old regions, which just seem to evolve Pokemon at random. Sword and Shield's art team was directed by James Turner, and his influence pops in all of the new Pokemon. Sword and Shield, despite how maligned they are, have spawned some of the biggest fan-favorite Pokemon in recent years. Think Wooloo, or the fossil Pokemon, Arctozolt, Dracozolt, Arctovish, and Dracovish. Dracovish especially dominated the discussion around Sword and Shield, with having a goofy and memorable design and a stupidly overpowered move added together to make an iconic and memorable Pokemon. Dragapult is one of the most universally beloved pseudo-legendary Pokemon, or powerhouse Pokemon if you're weird or the Pokemon Company. And the twin legendaries Zacian and Zamazenta are decently popular themselves, although extremely underrated. As of writing this video, competitively, in VGC at least, a lot of Galar Pokemon are absolute staples. Indeedee, Rillaboom, Calyrex, and Urshifu are the main ones I can think of, but Zacian and Zamazenta get a lot of use, and Dracovish, as I said, was dominating during Sword and Shield, with Pokemon like Pincurchin making solid appearances as terrain setters and various support Pokemon. Back to the designs though, since I don't know much about VGC, one of the best things about the designs in this region is just how concise the concepts and designs are, making for easily recognizable ideas with cute or cool designs depending on what's being gone for. Take the Galar fossils, which I've mentioned multiple times now. The concept with them follows an old joke in paleontology, where in Britain a lot of fossils were misjudged, combined, and made up for the sake of discovering new dinosaurs before other people could during the Bone Wars. In Galar, the fossils are recombined by a scientist named Careless, which is a pun on careless if you didn't get that, into monstrosities which look like they're suffering. Heads attached on tails, heads flipped upside down, bodies that clearly don't fit their heads, but yet Careless says of course they would have lived like this in ancient times. This is just one of many jokes or references stuck into these Pokemon, and I recommend watching a video about this if you want to know all of them. I'll link one in the description if I remember to do it, and if I don't, please remind me in the comments. I don't really have much else to say about the Pokemon from this region. I have very little bad to say about them, and most of what I have to say otherwise I pretty much summarized above. I love the regional evolution mechanic, something which was used in a great way to add new additions to old Pokemon lines with interesting concepts and fun gameplay. I like the Gigantamax Pokemon designs. Almost all of them add unique ideas to existing or new lines in a way that Mega Evolution did, but in a way that I believe looks a lot better. Almost every Pokemon will end up being usable in a playthrough, and the Pokemon chosen for the regional Pokédex includes a lot of Pokemon people often don't think about or use, which incentivizes use of them in a normal playthrough. In fact, in one of my challenge runs from a couple months ago, every single old Pokemon I used was a Pokemon I'd never used in a playthrough before. It made things a lot more fun and a lot more challenging, trying to figure out the ins and outs of them as I played with them. Sword and Shield were the first games to introduce DLCs to the Pokemon franchise, charging around $30 for two separate post-game stories following new areas of Galar, the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra. I'll talk about these two separately. The Isle of Armor is a story about training yourself to become the best version of you that you can be. It starts with meeting a new student at the Master Dojo, either Clara or Avery depending on the version. These two are, without question, the most entertaining and fresh rivals we've ever gotten. They are liars, cheaters, and some of the most toxic, lazy, and annoying people we've ever seen in the Pokemon franchise. Clara is a pop star, and Avery is a psychic. They're both at the Master Dojo to improve themselves, in hope of getting people to like them. For Clara, she wants a new fanbase, and for Avery, he wants his family to think he's good enough to take over the Psychic-type gym in Galar. They start out as horrible, hateable people, they cheat in their battles against you, they lie to the owners of the gym, and yet you keep winning against them no matter what, which infuriates them and makes them change their minds. The growth is also reflected for you through the use of Kubfu, the brand new legendary of the Isle of Armor. Kubfu trains with you as you train with it, eventually allowing it to turn into the mighty Urshifu. It turns out that you've been training under the same rigorous training that the other champions of Galar have gone under. The dojo's master, Mustard, is an ex-champion himself. Urshifu's evolution shows the growth of the player throughout their journey of Galar, which is something that's really cool and not done very well in other games. Or your motivation pushing them to be better people through spite, which is a really entertaining character arc. All of this is present in the story, but it doesn't really feel good to play. I'll be honest, I really did not like the Isle of Armor. I didn't on release, and I don't now. It feels stale, the gameplay feels pointless, it's just a stream of battles with characters I don't really care about except for the rivals, and a journey for a legendary I also, shockingly, don't really care about. But this DLC is short and sweet, it adds a bunch of fan-favorite Pokemon back, and introduces one of my favorite Pokemon ever in Galarian Slowbro, so I'll give it a pass, especially considering the next DLC is one of the best Pokemon has ever made. The Crown Tundra story is not as personal as the Isles is, but it's a hell of a lot more fun. The Crown Tundra is a historical area of Galar, the ruins of a kingdom thousands of years old, once ruled by the King of Bountiful Harvests, a Pokemon named Calyrex. You come to the tundra and meet with Peony, an adventurer, and his daughter, Peonia. Peony wants to take his daughter on an adventure throughout the tundra, but she doesn't quite love the idea, instead wanting to explore the nearby Max Lair, so he decides on taking you instead. Upon restoring a statue in the nearby town of Freezington, a Pokemon gets your attention, revealing itself to be the legendary Pokemon Calyrex. Calyrex knocks out Peony and uses his body to speak to you in plain English, a genuinely hilarious bit that's kept up throughout the entire story, with Peony missing half of it because Calyrex keeps knocking him out. Calyrex asks the player to help it lure its steed back. Depending on your decision, that steed is either the Ghost-type Spectrier or the Ice-type Glastrier. The player can summon one of the steeds, which comes back and attacks Freezington, before battling the player and running away. Calyrex tells you how you can use the hair it left behind to recreate his legendary Reigns of Unity and tame the steed. Calyrex then takes the player to the Crown Shrine, where it tames its steed and challenges the player, allowing them to catch it as a form of thank you for restoring its former power. This is the first and largest of the adventures that Peony takes you on. One of the other ones deals with the legendary giants, Regirock, Regice, and Registeel. After capturing them, you can go to the Split Decision Ruins, where you can encounter either Regieleki or Regidrago, the two new giants which are introduced in this DLC. The next adventure is about the Galarian legendary birds, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. This one's simpler, and you find hints about their locations and capture all three of them after finding them at the giant tree in the tundra. All in all, the legendary Pokemon of the Crown Tundra are really fun and really unique, whether they're cool additions to old groups or new versions of tired Pokemon, or even a brand new legendary that actually speaks to you. The story that ties all these Pokemon together in a really cool way, Peony being like a fun dad that the average Pokemon main character just never has, and a fun tour guide with a bombastic personality. This is even funnier when you find out that Peony is a previous champion of Galar, and also the father of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's Penny. This story doesn't have anything big to say like the last one does, but this works in its favor. It's meant to be a fun legendary hunting romp, giving the player a fun way to hunt back and forth for legendaries in the series, and even get some of them in shiny form. The story of Peony and his daughter and his want to connect with his kids through his own corny dad way is really cute as well, and led well into Penny in the next games, having the same thing happen to her in the epilogue of that game's DLCs. All in all, I think the DLCs for Pokemon Sword and Shield are really fun. I think that if you haven't given them a try yet and you're now on the fence after watching this video, give it a shot. They're fun. I like them. I like the Crown Tundra more than the Isle of Armor, but the Isle of Armor is still decent, you know? I really hope that I've made it clear that Pokemon Sword and Shield are not perfect games. As much as I wish these games were given the time they needed to be fully cooked. It's been almost 6 years, and that just isn't possible anymore. But I hope I've also made it clear that these games aren't just pieces of garbage to be ignored, that they have value besides their flaws, and can be enjoyed without you having to feel bad for liking them. Though, at the same time as all of this, I really hope you realize what I've been doing for this entire video. The Pokemon fandom likes to cherry-pick moments to prove the worth of a group of games. before BDSP released, loved Diamond and Pearl. People were calling them the best games in the series. And BDSP proved them very, very wrong as faithful remakes that just were not fun to play. You don't see anyone call those games the best anymore, but you definitely did before. We're seeing the same thing happen with Black and White, although I admit those games are actually very good. I've been doing the same thing with Sword and Shield the whole video. Despite these being my favorite games, a lot of my arguments in this video weren't really arguments, just things I personally liked. But people who watch this video, they'll see them as arguments anyway, right? I want people to like Sword and Shield as much as I do, but that won't happen. It's just not realistic. People will like what they want, and I'll like what I want, and people will dislike what they want, and I'll dislike what I want. That's how the Pokemon fandom should work, but that's never how it is. This video is probably going to change a couple people's minds just because I outlined things in a way that makes things look good. People might change their minds if they watched a video trashing on Sword and Shield, making them think, wow, these games really suck. The only way that you're going to get a game to be how it should be in your mind is by playing it completely yourself. For the first time, just go through everything, read the dialogue, do as much as you can, just see how much you like it then. That's what you gotta do. I hope that this video let you see that these games have as much good to them as they do bad. Whether or not you let one weigh out the other is up to you. I just hope I've opened your eyes to some of the better aspects of each. And with that, it's finally over. I've been working on this video through a pretty hard time for myself, honestly. My last video was over a year ago when I was graduating from high school, and I'm in my second year of college now. I want to thank all of you for how much love that last video got, and I want to apologize for how long it took me to make this video now. I hope I can start making more videos just like this in the future, probably about Pokemon, but about other things too. That being said, if you enjoyed the video, please let me know you did by liking it and subscribing. It really helps motivate me to make more videos like this. I really hope you enjoyed this mess, and I'll see you whenever the next video comes out.